Now we're going to learn about the slip stitch. But to begin the slip stitch, guess what we're going to do? Yes, that's right. We're going to tie another knot because it's another permanent stitch. So, the end of my thread tail in my non-dominant hand, my needle by the point in my dominant hand. I'm going to lay my needle. See how I'm grabbing that thread coming out of the eye? Lay my needle over the thread in my non-dominant hand. Grab the tail, pull it up and over 3 times, and then back toward my thumb and my finger. Pull the needle through, pinching, and there's my knot. Once you get the hang of it, it's really, really easy. It's just a new skill to learn. And I'm going to trim my thread tail off. Okay, so the slip stitch. To prepare my fabric for the slip stitch, again, just like the catch stitch, I'm going to turn and press it neatly on the ironing board, under the iron, obviously, because for this one in particular, I very much need this nice clear fold, because that's where most of the travel of this stitch lives. Okay, this stitch was actually introduced to me as the bunny in the tunnel. Okay, so this fold that I've created right here, that's my tunnel, and that's the bunny, and he's very shy. So, to begin, see the fold? I'm going to come up here with the needle, the alleged bunny. I'm going to go into that fold, just like that, and I'm going to hide my knot in there, because knots are unseemly and we don't want to see them. So, if this is indeed a bunny, the bunny comes out of the tunnel. He takes a tiny, and I mean tiny, bite. And when he comes out of the tunnel, he comes straight out. He does not come out at an angle. He comes straight out of the tunnel. I'm going to take a tiny little bite of the outside fabric. I'm going to pull that stitch through, and then I'm going to go straight back into the tunnel. Once my needle is firmly in that tunnel, which it isn't yet, there it goes, then I'm going to lay my needle along that fold. So my needle is right there inside the fold. I'm going to push the needle through so it comes out again right at the fold, and I'm ready to take my next stitch. This is as much of that stitch as you should see on the inside of your fabric, and that's as much as you should see on the outside. It should be tiny and invisible in a very Ninja Bunny kind of way. Okay? So again, he comes out, takes a tiny bite of the fabric right along that fold so our outside stitches are nice and neat and straight. And then back into the fabric, and he turns and lays. And all I'm doing is my needle is stuck into the fold, and I'm just swiveling it, just like that. Nothing fancy or extraordinary happening. My stitches in the fold tend to be about the width of my thumb, because it's an easy measuring tool that I have with me all the time. And then I pull that through. And that's how you do it. You just go along that, and you take tiny little bites, making sure that your stitches coming out of the fold and going back into the fold are perpendicular. You do not want to see any more stitch than this tiny little bit right here. And if this were in the same color as my fabric, you would never see it. There's nothing better than having someone come to you with their seam that you've done with this stitch and saying, I can't find your stitches. Great. That's as it should be. Okay? And then I'm going to take another, and again, just like I was doing with the running stitch and the back stitch and pretty much every other hand stitch, I'm manipulating the fabric, and the needle is pretty much staying stationary, except when I swivel it. So when you go into the fold, make sure that you've got your fabric pulled pretty taut between your fingers here, so that you're not catching anything that you shouldn't catch, which is what I'm doing right now. Okay, there we go. And then swivel and pull that through. And of course you're going to catch the corners and it's going to give you fits. But you can also do this stitch from seam to seam, from fold to fold. And that way when you do that, like for example, if you have a jacket that has a hole in the center back seam and the jacket's lined, you don't want to have to take the whole jacket apart to fix the hole in the center back seam, right? So you've basically got two folds butt up against each other, excuse me, and you can treat them both as the tunnel and then travel up and up and up like a ladder all the way up those two folds together. You want to make your traveling a little smaller than the width of your thumb in that instance, or you're going to have another hole in your center back seam. But basically you can do that without having to take anything apart, and it's an invisible fix to a kind of obnoxious problem when that happens. But you know, if you've got somebody who likes to hulk out and spread their shoulder blades apart, it happens sometimes. So it's nice to know how to fix it. So I'm taking my tiny bite of just the outside. This stitch is very much like the catch stitch in that I'm stitching through the fold and then I'm stitching through the outside and then I'm stitching to the fold. But it's different in that I'm stitching the fold to the outside. It does not have the wiggle room that the catch stitch has. It doesn't move like a catch stitch does. It's much more hammered in place than a catch stitch. So this one you're not always guaranteed to meet yourself. As if you're using it for a hem, of course you're going to meet yourself, but if you're using it to repair a seam, then you're not. So you need to know how to tie this one off. And we want to be sure when we tie this one off that we've taken all the stitches we can. So I'm still going to do a tiny little bite through this end up here because I still have room to do that. And then I'm going to go, instead of going into my fold, I'm going to stitch through the fold and then through the fold again, and then go through the back to tie my knot, and then through the fold and through the back to tie my knot. One more time just to make sure it's secure. I'm going to trim off my thread tail, and there's my slip stitch. That's all of the stitch I should see. If you're seeing a lot of angles like that when you're doing your stitches, you're not going in straight enough. You need to go in as straight as possible. And then on the outside, these in the center got a little big. These on the side are a little small. But ideally, they're the same color and you never see them. And that is your slip stitch, or the bunny in the tunnel, depending on who you're talking to. And let's trim that down just a scoop. Okay.